Hello, this is my presentation on gottlob frege. And so right here, right away, you can tell that these are the younger pictures of him, and he's a little older right there. So he lived from about 1849 to 1925. So this is on a little bit of his life. He was a very important figure in the development of modern logic and analytical philosophy. So he was born on November 8th, 1849 in Weimar, Germany. So this is where he mostly grew up and where he was born. So he contributed a lot to mathematics, logic, and philosophy, and he still continues to shape the academic world today. We build a lot on his theories and a lot of what he has done. So, unfortunately, not a lot was found on him. I could not find a lot. Especially about his personal life, it's really like it wasn't really recorded, I guess you could say. But he was married and she sadly passed away in World War One, and so he never had any children of his own. He actually adopted a son and his name was Alfred. So that's a little interesting fact. So, Frank's parents actually, Alexander and Augustine, were both principals at a girls' private school. So this is the girls' private school. So you could tell right away he grew up in a very intellectually stimulating environment. Like, imagine both of your parents being principals. That's kind of crazy. So, what I kind of found out was that it was a girls' private school, but then it kind of evolved to become a both boy and girls school, and I think it added, I guess you could say, more grade levels to it because the German education system is very different from the one we have in America and in other countries. So I'll explain it a little more in the next slide, I think, but I guess you could say this is where he um had his elementary middle school years. So, Frege resided in Weimar, Germany until 1869, where he attended gymnasium. So, in the spring of 1869, he continued his study at the University of Jena. So, this is the university. These are actually really beautiful places. Like the schools in Germany, they are gorgeous. So, he mainly focused his studies in chemistry, philosophy, and mathematics. And after 4 years, actually it was 4 semesters, sorry, he transferred to the University of Göttingen. I hope I pronounced that right, because it's in German. But so he transferred, and in 1873 he received his PhD with a dissertation on geometry. So that's very interesting. So Gottlob spent most of his professional life as a teacher. So he worked as a teacher from, I believe, 1874 to 1917. So when he first began, again, the German education system and the way, I guess you could say, they rank their teachers is very different. So he first he was primarily a mathematics teacher, but he also taught logic and philosophy. So he very at the very beginning of his teaching and his education, he was considered an extraordinary professor. So that isn't necessarily like, I guess, a middle school or high school or elementary or a certain professor. He was just considered what we call today teacher of the year. It was just a title, not necessarily a position, I guess. So he was just considered teacher of the year. And so then he ended up later becoming a statutory professor of mathematics, and he lectured in all the branches of the subject, which is crazy because if you think about it, math, there's a lot of things behind math, you know what I mean? So what statutory is considered the second and third level of a professor. So first you have your junior professor, then you have your professor, full professor, university professor, and your honorary professor. So statutory would be your professor slash full professor. And then despite being more widely known as a mathematician, he really considered himself a philosophical thinker, and one of his most famous quotes is every good mathematician is at least half of a philosopher, and every good philosopher is at least half of a mathematician, which you see his quotes kind of reflect in his work, because a lot of the mathematical, I guess you could say, theories and the things he published coincide with philosophy. It's actually really interesting. So Frege made several contributions to his field. He actually, what I found out was he made from around 120 to 180 works, published and unpublished. You know, all the books and papers he wrote, which is a lot. Like, how do you write like tomorrow won't arrive? You know what I mean? I'm just kidding. That was from Hamilton. But Hamilton wrote like 5,000. Anyways, so one of his most, I guess, famous publications was a concept script, which I'll explain more in his most professional contributions that he did, but he really laid the groundwork for modern predicate logic. And his work greatly impacted several philosophers. For example, right here, Bertrand Russell, and right here you can see Rudolf Cartman and Ludwig Wittgenstein. So Frege is also well known for his distinction between sense and reference, which is fundamental in the philosophy of language. Throughout his career, Frege made significant contributions to the foundations of arithmetic. He I don't know, he really liked arithmetic because what I've seen is a lot of his works are on arithmetic. So he also contributed to formal logic, analytical philosophy. He had countless achievements. He developed Frege's theorem, which connects arithmetic to logic, and he was instrumental in establishing the philosophical underpinnings of analytical philosophy and influenced many thinkers in the 20th century. And this is just kind of a, I guess, like overview of what he did. Just a little quick thing. I'll explain them a little more in the professional contributions section. So after a long career dedicated to math, logic, philosophy, and just overall academics, he retired in 1917, and he passed away sadly on July 26, 1925, at the age of 76. So his works remain a cornerstone in these fields, influencing generations of scholars and shaping the intellectual landscape of the modern era. He really did contribute a lot to math and philosophy and how they can even coincide together, like how they really can, I guess, work together. Like learning about him really made me think about how like math and philosophy can come together, which is really interesting. So one of Frege's major, he made numerous contributions to logic and math and philosophy, but one of his major contributions was a concept script, which was published in 1879. So it was kind of like the last one. Well, it is the last one I was talking about. So essentially, this work introduced a formal language for logical analysis, and Frege's main goal was to develop a formal system that could accurately express mathematical logical truth. He aimed to show that arithmetic could be derived from purely logical axioms, and he addressed the limitations and vagueness of natural languages by creating a new system of notation. So, like, a little example that I kind of like helped me understand was this. So if A is it's raining, C as the ground is wet. So through his notation, it would mean like if it's raining, then the ground is wet. You know what I mean? Like if one thing is this, then that means this other thing is that, you know? And he used math that way. So he could kind of, I guess, use math to explain logic in a sense. And so it kind of laid the foundation for modern mathematical logic and the development of predicate logic and formal semantics. The one down here, a significant contribution is his book, The Foundation of Arithmetic, and which was published in 1884. And this book explores the philosophical foundations of arithmetic, and it laid the groundwork for logicism in mathematics and aiding the development of analytical philosophy. So it's really interesting. So one of his most famous papers on sense and reference, which was published in 1892, distinguishes the difference between sense and reference. So, these are linguistic expressions, I guess, how he defines them. So, sense refers to the way we understand and comprehend the meaning of linguistic expressions, while reference is the actual object in the world to which the expression refers to. So, this helps distinguish and kind of clarify how we understand things and how we refer to them. So, an example would be the real world item here is a cat. So we could describe a cat as fluffy and fuzzy, but sense refers to, well, fluffy and fuzzy are two different things. It just depends the context you use them in. So that's what his paper is about. And then one of his most famous principles actually is Frege's context principle, and it's kind of self-explanatory. Context, the way we put things into context. So he basically is saying that, you know, the meaning of a word and how we express it depends on its context, and it's crucial to the word and how we put it into context. So this principle was very important because it provided a deeper understanding of linguistic meaning and shaped how we perceive and interpret language. And it also encouraged a broader perspective of meaning. So a good example to help explain and understand, you know, I can say, oh, my millions of dollars are in Bank of America, you know? But you could also use the word bank as in the fish were swimming along the river bank. So you know the context, it just, you can use a word. A word can have several meanings, but the context is different. And that's his Frege's context principle. So now we're getting into his more major philosophical theories of the era. So this theory specifically influenced the 20th century significantly, and it was his theory of logicism. So his theory essentially is saying that mathematical truth can derive from logical truth through a rigorous formal system. So I really like using examples, and these are really dumbed down examples, but I just think it's really good to, you know, help understand. So essentially, let's say I have 3 apples, right? But I end up gaining 2 bananas, right? That would mean I have 5 pieces of fruit. So through Frege's system, essentially, he would use this to figure out what this would equal to, which is 5, kind of using this logical equation. You know, of course you'll have 5 pieces of fruit, like you have 3 apples, bananas, 5 pieces of fruit, duh, right? So that would help him solve this mathematical equation. Another really good example that I like is zero is not a real number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the numbers, the real numbers we first learned. Zero is more the absence of something. So that's his theory of logicism. So all of Frege's work and studies were really impacting the 20th century because at this time the foundations of math were being identified with logic and set theory, and as we're learning, we see that Frege really believed logic and math and philosophy really coincide. A lot of his theories and the books he published are kind of stating like math, you can figure out certain math equations through logic, right? And his contributions laid the groundwork for a formal system of logic, and he influenced the development of modern logic and changed the philosophy of mathematics. And he even addressed Russell's paradox, one of his famous paradoxes, and even contributed to the foundations of computer science. So Frege's theory of logicism is actually also linked with the philosophy of language, particularly his distinction between sense and reference, and his work inspired the philosophy of language and had a lasting impact on analytical philosophy. So, Frege, of course, worked with many people and a lot of notable contemporaries. Bertrand Russell would be one of the most famous ones, actually, and he played a significant role in analytical philosophy and greatly influenced Frege's work. Actually, Russell found a paradox in one of Frege's theories, and it led to further development, which was really interesting to me because, you know, like I like how they're helping each other essentially kind of develop more and kind of working together. And so this actually inspired Russell and Alfred. This is Alfred North Whitehead, Principia Mathematica. Russell's contributions to philosophy of language, including his emphasis on logical form, which transformed analytical philosophy. It's very interesting. So another contemporary would be David Hilbert, who engaged in debates influenced by Frege's logicism and Russell's paradox, and Edmund Husserl, who explored the philosophy of mathematics and logic under Alfred's influence. So essentially, like they would debate and they would kind of go more in depth into the theories, and it actually developed them even more very interestingly. Like they were debating like these little silly gooses. And that's actually really interesting because they kind of worked as a team, like they influenced one another, and even like the paradox that Russell kind of found in Frege's work just helped it develop even more, which is super interesting. So now to my interpretation. So in fact, while I am not able to change the color of a thing or its hardness in the slightest by mere perception, I can regard the Iliad as one poem, as 24 cantos, or as a large number of verses. Do we not speak of 1,000 leaves in a completely different sense than of the green leaves of a tree? We attribute the green color to each leaf, but not the number 1,000. We can group all these leaves of the tree together under the name of its foliage. This too is green, but not 1,000. To whom does the property 1,000 actually belong to? It also seems neither to the individual leaf nor to the whole, perhaps not really the thing of the external world. So this selection is from one of Frege's most famous works, The Foundations of Arithmetic, and it kind of addresses whether numbers are properties of external things. So in this specific part, essentially, he explains how we perceive and categorize things, and it really personally challenged me to think about numbers as abstract items rather than just things we count. So Frege's text explores the interplay between perception and reality, which was impactful to me. So, really, my interpretation of this passage is that specific words and properties, like in the passage being used 1,000, do not necessarily belong to anything. We use these words to describe other properties. Everyone has their own understanding and perspective. Like a good example would be if someone wants to label an object shaped like spherical, but someone says, no, it has more of a wonky shape, then it becomes subjective. Like it's just based on what we see and, our background knowledge. And so, like, I can regard the Iliad as one unified poem with several verses and, different sections with different meanings. And it just kind of highlights how flexible and subjective our interpretation can be, and this idea extends beyond literature numbers or even leaves to how we perceive reality and the natural world around us. It also shows how we apply our sense experience and our past experiences and just the knowledge that we have and how we apply it. And I feel like even though, if you think about it, this specific selection was from one of his books about arithmetic, it's it's encouraging us to think deeper about math as more abstract concepts and to critically consider how we categorize and attribute properties to objects. So this really changed my perspective, and I feel like if you really think about it, it could change your perspective because I see now more a little bit more open-minded and I'm less critical about other people's, I guess, how they perceive things, and it kind of made me be more aware of the lens through which I view the world and to be again more open-minded because essentially in these certain things, no one can be wrong. Like, like, oh, I think this, but you think that. No, you're wrong. No, I think we should all just like accept that we all can be right. Like, why not? Why can't we just all be right? Like, hello, no more fighting. I should run for president. Like, and I really liked this example because these men um are um blindfolded and they are kind of with their sensory experience kind of feeling what the elephant, well, they don't know it's an elephant, but they're kind of touching it and they're like, okay, well, I think it's a snake, no, it's a wall, it's a rope, you know like, who's wrong and who's right, you know what I mean? Like, it just opens up really your mindset. So now to conclude this presentation, and especially with the passage we just read, like, I think the meaning of the world is not a fixed thing, but an idea shaped by our individual experience and varies from person to person. I mean, we each have our own perspective and on the world, and it leads us to believe different things, and especially how you grew up and your morals and just really truly what you believe and what you've experienced is how you feel the meaning of the world is. It just really matters on what you think and how you see it and really what you believe. So that concludes. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, just one thing. I know it's a little boring, but thank you.